It all ends here as we've reached the final installment of the Harry Potter game series, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. After the total train wreck that was Hallows Part 1, EA had the chance to address the complaints of that game in order to end the Potter series on a positive note. Well, I've got some good news and bad news. Good news is that EA removed about 90% of what was wrong with the first game. The backtracking through levels, the spell wheel, the invisibility cloak, 4 points, along with the encounter challenges, have all been removed. Bad news is that most of the new additions give Hallows Part 2 its own negatives, though to its credit, it's a slightly better game than Part 1. But that's not saying much. Hallows Part 2 follows most of the key points from the film. The game starts off with Harry, Ron, and Hermione sneaking into Gringotts before heading to Hogwarts in order to begin the final battle against Lord Voldemort and his Death Eaters. I also really love the opening text the game gives to recap the last game. It doesn't even mention anything specifically important, like the fact that Harry destroyed one Horcrux and that Dobby died. Speaking of Dobby, I guess Harry left his corpse on the beach since we never see him bury him. Also, isn't part of the recap wrong? Voldemort never got the Elder Wand in the last game. He gets it in the opening of this game. And once again, we have our list of scenes that have been changed or removed for unknown reasons. For example, why is Snape's death a fade to black? And how come he doesn't have any blood on him? Where's the bloody Voldemort body in King's Cross? How come Mrs. Weasley's awesome line to Bellatrix is missing a certain word? I mean, come on, the film let her say it. Why not show Goyle's death instead of giving me this lame replacement?
Goyle didn't make it!
And to that effect, why not show Lupin and Fred's bodies instead of just telling me that they're dead? However, the biggest fault with the game design is that EA chose to build the story around linear levels that are incredibly short. Hallows Part 2 spends most of its time at Hogwarts, so it's questionable as to why EA didn't choose to make the game free roam again. Think of how cool it could have been to fight your way all around Hogwarts, battling Death Eaters as you make your way to your objectives, fighting alongside McGonagall, the Weasleys, and all of your favorite characters. Instead, you'll just make your way through mostly empty corridors with only Ron and Hermione. I mean, where the hell are all the other students? The castle's like completely devoid of life, there's nobody around. I mean, let's compare the game with a scene from the film. Film? Game! You can also play as a bunch of characters from the film, like Ron, Hermione, Neville, McGonagall, and others. Though none of these characters play any different from one another, so there really is no excitement when you get to control another character. And how come characters like McGonagall and Mrs. Weasley don't have more powerful spells? I mean, aren't they more experienced witches? They have the same spells as Harry, they just have a slightly different color to them. There is a new spell system that thankfully removes that god-awful spell wheel. You can now switch to a different spell by tapping or double tapping 3 of the face buttons, though the double tapping can sometimes make you select the wrong spell or stay on the spell you wanted to switch out. While this system is a big improvement over the spell wheel, spellcasting can still have its flaws. This time you're given the spells Stupefy, Expelliarmus, Confringo, Petrificus Totalis, Impedimenta, and Expulso. Certain spells can now be used in specific situations. Petrificus Totalis can now be used to kill faraway Death Eaters, Impedimenta can be used to attack multiple enemies through a lock-on system, and Expelliarmus can break enemy Protego charms, which is a nice touch even if that's not how Expelliarmus works in the books and films. Stupefy, Expelliarmus, Confringo, and Expulso can be used in any situation with little difference into how they're cast or their effect. However, the big negative to spellcasting is that most of the spells are locked until specific moments in the campaign. Playing the game over again allows you to use all of the spells straight from the beginning. With most of the more interesting spells locked from the beginning, get ready to start spamming Stupefy again for more than half the campaign. I mean, why do the spells have to be locked? Does Harry just suddenly remember he can use certain spells at certain times? They should just all be available right from the beginning. Overall, though, even with some of these issues, the spellcasting is definitely more engaging than it was in Part 1. The game also now allows Harry to apparate, which is not nearly as interesting as it sounds. Apparating just has you jumping forward in any given direction that you choose. Apparation is mostly used just to quickly jump from cover to cover, and that's about it. You have no real choice into how far you can apparate, which limits how fun the mechanic could have been. Also, you won't be able to rush through the enemies this time around, as the game now locks you in specific areas until all the enemies have been removed. More often than not, you'll find your path blocked by a locked door, which will require you to cover Hermione while she tries to unlock it. And let's just say that if you have any knowledge of the Alohomora spell, you'll find the several minutes it will take Hermione to open these doors quite baffling. The one interesting mechanic that Hallows brings to the gameplay is the few sections where the game has you free running away from some hazard. It can be fun to fire off spells and watch things in the environment explode, however there's only a few of these sections and they only last for a few minutes. There are boss fights again, though they're really no different than the standard Death Eaters you'll face. Doesn't matter what spell you use on them, and there's no strategy on how to damage any of the bosses. Some bosses will use Protego to stop your spells, but that's about it. Also, the game guides you through some of the fights with on-screen instructions. For example, during the fight with Bellatrix, the game told me what spell I should use and what Bellatrix's attacks pattern was. Even the fight with Voldemort is a letdown, as you can just randomly fire spells at him. Wouldn't it have been better if you had to use all of your spells to take down Voldemort, or use certain spells to interact with the environment in order to damage him? The strangest part about the boss fights is that after they take a few hits, you'll get a short cutscene where the boss will make a ridiculous face at you. I mean, some of them are just downright hilarious. I particularly like the Voldemort one. The game is also ridiculously short again. It will take you about 2 hours to complete, and probably less if you skip cutscenes and play on easy. So the game is literally shorter than the movie it's based on. This is why Deathly Hallows should have never been split into 2 video games. This way, the whole game could have at least been 6 hours. Though EA once again tries to extend the game's length by really cheap means. It allows you to unlock the hardest difficulty after one playthrough, in addition to having a brand new challenge menu. However, if you didn't like the challenges from the last game, you're really not going to like the challenges this time, as they're nothing more than levels from the main game with a timer attached to them. Like Hallows Part 1, these are just really cheap ways of trying to bulk up the game's length. A missed opportunity to the challenge section would be the ability to play with a friend. It would have made replaying through the story missions a bit more engaging. And also, to that extent, if you want to add a new feature to the game, why not just bring back the 2-player dueling mode from Half-Blood Prince? There are collectibles again, though they're not much better than the ones that were found in the last game, but they are a bit easier to find. You can collect figures of the characters from the game that you can view in the menu screens, and you can also collect pieces of music from the game's soundtrack. The presentation is not much of a step up from the first game, though the biggest negative coming from the presentation this time around is the voice acting. With most of the major characters now being replaced with stand-in voice actors, many of the major moments from the film are not delivered with the same dramatic weight as to what was seen in the film. Most of these scenes will just remind you how much better it was in the movie. A good example of this is the scene when Harry views Snape's memories. The scene in the game is lacking any of the emotion from the film.
Lily and James put their faith in the wrong person, Severus. Rather like you. The boy survives.
Doesn't need protection. The Dark Lord is gone.
The Dark Lord will return. And when he does, the boy will be in terrible danger. He has her eyes. If you truly loved her,
no one can.
I should never reveal the best of you, Severus.
Your word.
But she's dead.
Her son lives. If you truly loved Lily Potter, then you will protect her.
Lily? After all this time?
Always.
There is something Harry must know when Voldemort is at his most vulnerable. When Lily Potter cast herself in front of Harry, the killing curse rebounded. A part of Voldemort's soul latched itself onto the only living thing it could find. Harry.
So when the time comes, the boy must die.
Yes. And Voldemort himself must do it.
The soundtrack is actually pretty good, though, utilizing the John Williams theme quite frequently. Overall, Hallows Part 2 makes a valiant attempt to fix the issues from Part 1, with mixed results. It could have been worse, as EA could have simply left all of the mechanics found in Part 1 for Part 2, so at least EA did listen to the complaints. Hallows Part 2 is not that much of a mess, but in the end it's just a mediocre experience, and it's not a great way to end the Potter game series.